All right, well, my clock just ticked over to noon, so we will go ahead and get started. Some quick housekeeping before I turn things over to Susan. My name is Kayla. I am with the Metro Council, which is a collaborative membership organization representing the public mental health systems of community behavioral health centers serving the greater KC area. We provide support to our member organizations as well as education, information, and resources to the public on accessing quality health services. We host the Mental Health KC Conference every May. Hopefully, some of you have joined us for that before, as well as these free webinars on the second and fourth Thursday of every month. And something very exciting is happening next week, just a week from today. We are hosting our summer workshop meeting college mental health needs. That's going to be next Thursday, July 31st from 9:30 to 3:30 at the Johnson County Arts and Heritage Center. Registration is live now. It's just $15. You get 5 contact hours plus lunch and snacks. So a really great deal. I will drop that link to register in the chat as soon as I'm done with these introductions. And then just a quick reminder, disclaimer before we get started today, that the views and opinions presented are those of the speaker and do not necessarily represent the opinions of Metro Council. And at the end of today's webinar, you will be able to download a certificate of attendance. So I'll put the link in the password in the chat at the end of our session today. So let me quickly stop my screen sharing. That way you can see our amazing presenter, Susan, who we're thankful to have with us today. So Susan Lechliter is joining us today. She's going to be presenting on the very timely topic of going back to school and navigating the social dynamics, relationships, bullying, and relationship violence. So a quick bio on Susan. She is the manager of community-based clinical programs at PACES, which is part of Wyandotte Behavioral Health Network. Susan is clinically licensed in both Kansas and Missouri and brings over 20 years of experience working with youth in mental health and community-based settings. Susan oversees programs that provide trauma-informed, accessible care to individuals and families and is dedicated to improving mental health outcomes through collaborative, evidence-based approaches. And so, Susan, we're so glad that you're here today. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Well, I'm happy to be here today, and I'm happy that so many of you could join us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can get started on the PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, so as she mentioned, the topic today is back to school. And on our journey today, we are going to be covering several important topics. We will be looking at common issues that youth face, healthy building blocks in relationships we'll spend quite a bit of time on, because if those are in place, that helps to mitigate a lot of difficulties that youth will face across a variety of situations. Signs and impacts when some things might not be going as well as they could, and some practical tips and tricks that we can use to help youth out when things need some attention. So when we think about back to school, a lot of times what we'll think about is buying school supplies or buying clothes, things like that. Or we might think about difficulties that kids have with academics, with math, with the dreaded gym class, which was always the one that was the bane of my existence. But often it's not academics that cause kids problems. A lot of times it's relationships with other kids in the schools that are causing some issues. Part of this is because schools are populated based on geographical area, not by common interests. So a lot of times the people that are thrown together are not maybe somebody that there's a lot of commonality in. There's also a lot going on in the time frame with what kids are experiencing when they're in school that contributes to these difficulties. Some of them is trying to figure out their identity, who they are without being somebody's son or daughter, being their own person. And that process continues well up into the early 20s. This is a time in their life when they're turning to peers instead of to adults for any kind of information, or when they're having difficulties. And those peers probably don't have a lot more experience than they do in some of these situations. There are new intimate relationships that happen during the school years. And so that can cause some difficulties. And then things like cliques, bullying, and even relationship violence can come into play during school years. One of the most difficult things about being a kid is that everything is new. A lot of times when adults encounter difficulty, we've seen this problem many times. We've seen something similar. We've walked friends through these kind of difficulties. But if we can think back to when we had our first intimate relationship and that first difficulty came with it, we didn't have a big skill set on how to deal with this because it's new. A lot of the problems that kids face, they've never faced before. They don't have the skills to get through those. And so a lot of times it looks like kids are really struggling with things. And when we look back through our adult eyes, we're like, well, why don't they know to do this? Or why did they do that? And a lot of times it's really just because everything that they're coming and encountering with is new to them. The other thing that's really difficult about being a kid is everything is magnified. We tend to think about puberty as starting around maybe 10, 11 nowadays. But what we don't often recognize is the hormonal changes that happen internally. They start a couple of years before that. So if we're seeing a moody 8 or 9 year old, it may actually be the impact of those hormonal changes beginning. What that does is it puts emphasis on things and it takes a problem that's usually a small thing and it can blow it up to where it seems like a huge thing. For example, if I wanted to wear a favorite shirt to work tomorrow and I get up in the morning and I look and I'm like, oh, that's in the laundry basket, I can't wear that. I may be disappointed. I go to the closet. I may mope around for a minute or two that I have to wear something else, but then it passes. But think about how this is for a teenager or even a preteen. Sometimes if their favorite shirt is not available, they don't want to leave the house. No one can ever see them that way. It's the end of the world. And a lot of times this is simply because these hormones are in play, making things seem like they're more intense than what they normally would be. So what we have to keep in mind when we're dealing with kids is there's a lot of physiological changes that could be impacting mood and what is happening to them at this time in their development. Kids also get a lot of messages about how to handle relationships, and I'm sure that these have been around for a long time. I'm sure a lot of you listening today have heard some of these yourself, such as if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. Don't make waves. Conflict is bad. If somebody is hurting you, just leave the relationship. It's not worth having. And none of these things help kids in order to navigate relationship difficulties or to advocate for themselves and to set healthy boundaries. And with those skills, they would have a lot more success in a lot of different situations. So this is something that we can put some attention on and try to teach kids in order to help them to get through things that they're causing them difficulty. One of the hallmarks of a healthy relationship is actually the ability to work through difficulties. Resolving a conflict with somebody can actually bring us closer together with that person. And if you think about some friendships that have lasted over the years, there's probably difficulties. There's probably times when people were angry with each other or something was not right. But the skill set of being able to talk to another person, resolve that conflict and say, you know, I really care about this person. It's just this behavior that I don't care for, and learning how to address those behaviors. That's really challenging for kids who are entering into these situations, maybe for the first time, maybe not having these skills in place. And it's also difficult to let people know when we're being hurt. If you think about if you're in the grocery store and someone is standing on your foot, we probably don't have a lot of issues off my foot. If someone hurts us emotionally, how easy is it to say, hey, when you said this thing or when you did this thing, it hurts, please stop. Some of the messages that we get from society tell us that we shouldn't be addressing those things. Difficulties in relationships that we're going to encounter during our lifetime. One of the messages that we tend to get is that conflict is bad. Actually, conflict is healthy. There's a difference between conflict and having an argument. If we have conflict with somebody, it simply means that we have a difference of opinion with them. And that's going to happen with our family members, within our intimate relationships, with our friends. And the way to resolve that is through respectful discussion. And we'll get into some tips for that in a little bit in more depth. But the goal to conflict, when we're dealing with it, should be resolving whatever the issue is. An argument, on the other hand, can involve yelling, raised voices, and it's usually about a power struggle and trying to dominate the other person or to get your point across rather than to resolving something that may be an issue between the people who are involved. So a question, and this is one that I ask kids when I work with them, is who wins an argument and how do you know when you've won an argument? And I've gotten a lot of interesting answers over the years. I had one group of kids where somebody said, when you make the other person cry, which is, it's disturbing. Um, a lot of times it's if you're the one that gets your way, is what people think. But if you really dig into this concept, what you find out is that nobody really wins an argument, because even if you are able to pound your point across, get your way, level that you also lose. So while you can resolve conflict, winning an argument is a totally different concept, and it's not really one that is healthy in a lot of situations. About that having healthy habits and healthy relationship building blocks can help people and kids to navigate through a lot of different difficult situations. One of the first things that healthy relationships have in common is direct communication. This means going to that other person and saying, this is hurting emotionally and I want this to stop. Being honest about these things. And these concepts are challenging even for adults. But learning to kind of dip your toe in the water, trying out some of these things when you're a kid, it's going to get ahead of the game, and it's really going to serve in the long run as skills that we can use for a lifetime. Healthy boundaries, which we'll go into in a little more detail about what those are and how to set those. Healthy conflict resolution and respect. I had someone when I was in high school tell me at one time, and I thought they were crazy when they said it, that respect was more important than love. But then when you really delve into that, I think that respect is an important component of love. There are people that we respect, that we can work alongside, live with, and be contented with for years. But there are people whom we love that don't have that component of respect built into the relationship, that we would rather have some distance from. So I would argue that respect is a healthy component of any relationship, even including those where love is involved. So this is from a family, this slide is about from a family systems perspective. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth in it, but I just want to bring to attention some of the things that can go wrong in a relationship. In a healthy relationship, what we really want is what we see there on the top, and that is everything goes between one person and the other person. Now, this is not group dynamics, which is another discussion that we could have. But in relationships between individuals, it should look like that top graphic. When there is stress between the two people and before it is resolved, it looks like the bottom graphic. It may get a little heated, may look a little hot, but again, everything is going between person number one and person number two. But that can get pretty uncomfortable. People don't like stress. People don't like having to say, ouch, you're hurting me, please stop. So what often happens when we don't use direct conversations is we'll invite a third person into what we call a triangle. And what this does is you can see that the color of the triangle, the stress is still there, but it's more of like a pink color rather than a bright red. So we're spreading this stress across another person. And we call that issuing an invitation to a triangle. And what that looks like is going to a person and say, hey, do you know what so-and-so just did to me? And then talking about that. The problem is people tend to get hurt in triangles. The person that's invited in may not have had a conflict with the first person, and now they do. The person that did the inviting rather than being direct, they cause additional stress between themselves and the first person, and the issue rarely gets resolved in this way. So we're really hoping to encourage people in relationships to be direct and to say what you need in the relationship and to set some boundaries. In relationship boundaries, when this happens, what we can do is just refuse the invitation to the triangle. So if someone would come to me and say, hey, do you know what so-and-so did to me? I can say, I'd be happy to listen to that. But if you want to resolve that issue, you probably should be talking to so-and-so. There's a difference between venting and just talking badly about somebody. When we vent, what we do is we're having so much emotion that we probably can't have this conversation at the current time because we're too upset or we're too angry. So we may talk to a third person about it and say, hey, I'm just venting about this. But the difference is there is an intent to just diffuse the emotion, maybe get a little advice, and then to go back to the original person and resolve that issue. If we don't go back and resolve the issue, then it just stays talking badly about someone and it doesn't ever go to what venting is supposed to be about, is just releasing a little bit of pressure so that we can resolve the original issue. We can also stop using relationships to define ourselves, because one of the healthiest ways for anyone to enter into a relationship is to know who you are, what you're wanting out of the relationship, what you're okay with, and what you're not. And if we're not thinking about these things in the relationship, then typically what happens is we go along thinking everything's okay, and then a red flag comes up, and then we explain it away, and we think, oh, well, they're just having a bad day, or oh, it's just this. And pretty soon there's 10, 15, 20, oh, it's just because of something. And then we tend to blow up all at once because we've not been addressing things as they come along. So having that direct communication helps that to happen, taking care of these issues as they come up and not saving them up all at once. And at that time, the relationship may be in jeopardy of ending. So what we're actually talking about with this is setting personal boundaries. So the way that we do this is to ask ourselves some key questions. What am I okay with in a relationship? And what am I not okay with? And then the next step is one of the most important. What am I going to do when someone crosses that boundary and does something that I'm not okay with? So as we talked about in the previous example, doing nothing, that tends to have hurt and resentment build up, and it tends to have a bad outcome. But if we say, I'm going to communicate to that other person and tell them, you know, this is hurting me and I don't like this, their answer a lot of times is going to give us the floor plan for what we do. If they answer and say, gee, I'm sorry, I didn't know I was hurting, I didn't mean to, try to do something better, that's the best outcome. And if they're telling you things like, oh, you're just too sensitive, you need to get over it, maybe we need to re-examine the value in this relationship. One of the most important things is to follow through with that plan, which is very difficult for kids. They're in these relationships for the first time. They're totally worried that they're going to lose a friend or the partner relationship if it's a new relationship for them. But we have to give them permission to question these things. Otherwise, they're going to be put in a situation where someone may take advantage of them, where someone may say to them, if you love me, you'll do this. And of course, the kids want to have a relationship. They want to have someone like them or someone love them. And so they may go along with it. And instead of instead of putting up these boundaries, they'll end up being taken advantage of and getting hurt. And this is not something that we want. So teaching kids how to do this inventory and to set some boundaries up and how to communicate those to other people are vital. And it's things that we can practice at home. We can say, what would you say to somebody if they did X, Y, or Z that you're not okay with? We can do these inventories with kids. What do you like to see in your friends? What do you not like to see in your friends? And have some conversations about those. When conflict does occur, people don't usually have hundreds of arguments. They usually have the same argument hundreds of times. And what this means is when we get in an argument, and we go back to what we talked about earlier, this is about trying to get our point across. It's a power struggle, trying to make sure that we get what we want, and it's not based toward or geared toward resolution. So what happens is somebody says something that hurts somebody else, and that person says, oh gosh, that hurts. Now I'm going to say something to hurt back. And then the volley starts going back and forth. What happens to the original issue at this point? What happens to it is we forget about it because we're concentrating so much on coming out on top of this power struggle that we forget about it. So the issue goes unresolved. And so next time this issue rears its ugly head, we may not even start at the beginning of the argument. We may start, 2 steps in, or sometimes we've been through it hundreds of times and we start in the middle or almost to the end of it. But it's the same argument. And the issue is we've never resolved the original conflict. We're just focused on volleying back and forth hurtful comments and things, trying to win an argument. But there are rules for avoiding arguments and for resolving conflict. One of the first ones that we can model and that we can teach is if we get heated to the point to where all we're focused on is hurting the other person, is probably time to take a break. It's probably time to say, you know what, I'm too mad to talk about this right now. Let me come back. And before we get too far down the road, these are some adult concepts, but I've worked with teenagers who were able to do this beautifully, even as young as 9 or 10. If there's some work done with this, they're able to do this. They're able to say, I'm mad and I need to go to my room. This is great because if an argument gets to the point where people are trying to hurt each other and hurling insults back and forth, nothing is going to get resolved. One of the things that's helpful with this is deciding in advance how much time you need for a break. And kind of the rule of thumb is the person who takes the longest to get over being angry, that's how long you set the break. So if somebody in the argument needs 10 minutes and the other person needs an hour and a half, decide in advance before you're having an inflammatory discussion that, if we get mad, then we're going to take a break and decide that it's going to be an hour and a half. Otherwise, that will become the focus of the argument at that point. It's very important to enter the discussion with the goal of resolution in mind. Now, I'm not saying that everybody needs to go all day, every day, having this stuff in the top of their head. But whenever we're going to talk about a situation with our kids that might be inflammatory, we can talk about beforehand, okay, now some of the things we're going to talk about today might be emotional things. They might trigger some anger or some other things. How are we going to handle that? And talking about, the things on this slide in advance can be very helpful. Also setting a boundary that we're only going to talk about one issue at a time. And it's a well-known tactic. Somebody says, hey, I have a problem when you do this. And the other person says, well, I have a problem when you do that. And then it just piles on and there's 20 things on the table. And again, the end result is the issue does not get resolved. So when someone says, oh, well, I have a problem when you do that, the response can be, I'd be happy to talk about it, but let's focus on this issue. And when we finish with that, we can go to the second one. Listening and pausing is important. We used to call this, when we were working with kids, we used to call this airspace, because a lot of times what happens when people are having a heated discussion, someone will say something and the second person is so busy and you can kind of see the wheels turning. They're so busy thinking about, what am I going to say to get my point across, that they're not even listening to what the speaker is saying. So a little trick is just teaching them to listen and pause for a second and saying, what did they say? And then answering can really help avoid a lot of issues. And then set some boundaries. Talk about things that trigger different people that are in the discussion. Name calling should be off of the table, because name calling is not geared toward resolution. It's geared toward that power differential again. Using the words always and never. Think about a kid who is maybe attempting to learn how to make their bed, and they've made their bed 4 out of 5 days. And then on the 5th day, they forget, and someone says to them, you never make your bed. Well, they're going to think, well, I might as well not, because no one is recognizing what I do. Those words tend to be very triggering for a lot of us. And then things that bother the other person. You can really customize and individualize these conflict rules. You can say, I don't like it when you roll your eyes. Does that mean you can never roll your eyes? No, it means we shouldn't be doing it when we're having this discussion where we're trying to resolve something. Or it could be, I don't like when you stand up because I feel like you're standing over me. Or I don't like it when we have these discussions in the car because then I feel trapped. So it really just goes back to that boundary piece, letting people know what you're okay with, what you're not, because the goal when we end up with a conflict is to resolve it. It is to see if we can get past this. And when I've worked with families with some of these issues, what I find out is the first time that they go through there's a lot of start and stops. There's a lot of breaks taken. They really have to pay attention to what they're doing. But once they get the process down and they've worked through the first issue, they're able to do it on their own. And usually all the hundreds of arguments stops because there really weren't 100 arguments in the first place. It's just that resolution was not happening. So this can be an extremely helpful skill to put into place. Also, one of the things that we talk about is choosing our emotions, because this is something what we do. People tend to sometimes externalize things and talk about other people make me angry. And when we do that, we give away the power to change what is happening to us. For example, I'll tell on myself, I'm not a big fan of people driving in the slow lane on the highway. I can choose to be angry about that. It impacts the other driver not at all. It just means I'm sitting in my car feeling bad because I'm upset. I could also choose to say, well, they have the right to drive any way that they like and focus on something else. And then I don't have a bad mood. I have to remember when I choose to be angry about something that I'm also choosing not to be happy. That doesn't mean there's not times that anger shouldn't occur. It's just that all emotions have a purpose. Sometimes we kind of overuse them. I rejoice sometimes when clients will get angry because it means that they are saying, I'm tired of being stepped on, please stop. This is one of the useful benefits of anger. If nobody got angry, nobody would be saving the whales in the rainforest. So every emotion can be good. Anxiety, if you're worried about taking a test, anxiety is supposed to motivate us to study. Sometimes we get anxiety about things that we have no control over, and that's not as good of use of that emotion. But we should also look at, we have a great deal of control over which emotions that we want to pay attention to and which ones we want to attend to. Sometimes, again, emotions that don't feel good have a purpose. If there is a loss, if there is a trauma, it is a good thing to grieve and to move through that. It's not a good thing to ruminate on something that is beyond our control. And really, we could be putting a better use to what we're paying attention to. Also, beware of the word should, because should, when we use that word, what it literally means is ought to, but not necessarily will. The way that people perceive the word should is someone else is telling them what they need to do with their life. And it's a very triggering word to a lot of people. So asking questions is often a better way to get to the point that you're trying to make, rather than telling a kid, you should do this and you should do that. Maybe asking a question such as, what do you think is going to happen if you keep doing this thing that you're doing? Or what do you think would happen if you changed what you were doing and instead did this? It's the same thing that we're trying to get to. It's just going by a different route, and it's probably going to be better received. Another tool that we can give kids is changing expectations. We tend to get expectations, and kids do it, adults do it, to where we expect an event or something in our life to happen in a certain way, and then we get very upset when it doesn't happen. Anybody that has watched some of the reality TV shows about brides, or the old movie, and I'm dating myself here, Christmas Vacation, where we blow things out of proportion and think these things need to be perfect. And then when they're not perfect, then we get angry and we get upset. And sometimes there's some shame and guilt if we can't perform in the way that we want to perform. And so what we can do is simply change our expectations. One of the definitions for success that I like to use is, if I'm better today than I was yesterday, then I am successful. And that takes that pressure off of having to feel like we're perfect. We get a lot of messages about, this has to be a perfect day, everything has to be perfect, or I'm playing this sport in school, and if I drop the ball, then my life is going to be over. And again, this goes back to some of those hormonal things are probably playing into that as well. Or if I'm playing a music competition and I blow a little passage in there, my life is going to be over. We should learn to celebrate the small things and model this for our kids and congratulate them on even small things. I don't care if they just go in and clean the toilet. Wow, that looks great. You did a great job. Instead of, well, you're supposed to do that. That teaches us, even as adults, if we gauge in that behavior, we don't have to be perfect. We need to give ourselves a little grace and be able to move through life in that way. And then we can choose to pay attention to things that make us feel better rather than looking at our deficiencies and things that can make us feel worse. Our relationships all start with us. And a lot of times when we get hurt and those emotions come into play, it's easier to look for blame in somebody else. A lot of times what we'll call this is sitting in the victim's role. And that means if everybody else in the world would do things the way that would make me happy, then I wouldn't be upset. Unfortunately, the world doesn't work that way, and it doesn't revolve around any of us. So learning that we have an impact on our own life and learning what changes that we can make is really a good thing. The tool to teach kids is, again, to pause. If someone comes and says, you did blah, 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 is before you get defensive and I did not, and no, that's not true, and with the explanations, because we're probably well on our way to an argument at this point, sometimes a simple pause and saying, did I do that? Did I do that thing? And if yes, then have a discussion. And if it's no, then wonder what I did that made them think that. And that might be your next question. No, I didn't do that. Why do you think I did that? And accepting responsibility for actions, but not the actions of others. And this is very difficult for kids because, again, these are new concepts to them and they need some help with them. They need someone to walk through these with them. Sometimes other kids will sit in the victim's role and blame them for things, and they'll accept that responsibility because they want to preserve that relationship. And maybe the things that they're getting blamed for aren't their fault. And then it leads to feelings of hopelessness and worthlessness about I mess everything up and people are always mad at me for doing these things. And maybe the issue is that someone else is asking them to take responsibility for their actions instead of their own. But also learning that mistakes are okay to make and are an opportunity to learn. And this is something that we need to model from our kids and teach them that it's okay, because everybody makes mistakes and we make more of them when we're young than at any other times in our life. And looking back with adult eyes about why are you making these mistakes instead of saying, yeah, I remember when I was your age, I made a lot of mistakes too. And walking through those and validating their feelings about those things can be a vital skill that we can put in place for kids that they can use for the rest of their life. One of the things that is difficult in today's world is online relationships. Depression is rampant in a lot of relationships today. A lot of kids report feeling lonely, and we're supposed to be more connected because we have all of these tools in order to keep us connected with other people. But when I'm working with kids, a lot of times I say, you know, how often do you interact with your friends? How often do you talk to your friends? Oh, I talk to them every day. Do you talk to them in person? Oh, no, we just text or we Insta or we do, you know, whatever. When we look at ourselves as human beings, we need human interaction. There have actually been cases in orphanages where kids have good medical care, they have food, they have everything that they need to thrive, but because they're not getting enough touch and enough human interaction with people, they don't thrive. And in some cases, there have even been deaths involved just because simply we need to interact with other people in physical ways. When all of our interactions are over technology, we get some benefits from that. We get some relationship perks from that, but we don't get near as many as when we are sitting across from somebody or sitting with somebody and having a discussion. And this has been contributing to a lot of the lonely and isolated feelings that kids are feeling today. So we need to create opportunities for them to engage in in-person activities to where they can get some of these needs met. Also, another thing about communicating in this way is that texts don't really have a tone. And so if somebody texts someone, and the other person is maybe not in the best of moods, they may interpret that as being, rude. And so maybe they send back another text, and then all of a sudden we're in a text argument. And I'm sure most of us have been in a text argument. Sometimes later you're like, boy, this was really dumb because that's not really what the other person said, and this was off and running, and then we feel ridiculous. But it can get pretty bad, especially if some of that triangulation occurs and then we forward the message to somebody else, we get them involved, or if it gets on social media and a lot of people are involved, it can blow up in a hurry. So one of the things that I try to talk to kids about is the rule of three. If you send somebody a text, that's one. If they reply back, that's two. And if there is negativity going on the third time, rather than sending that third text, pick up the phone and call or go see that person and see if you can say, is this really, what we are meaning with this communication? Or is this just because text doesn't have a tone and it's been a misunderstanding? And hopefully we can head this off before it ends up on social media and hundreds of people are involved in this process, because that can be a very damaging thing. We need human interaction and we need to understand one another. And even though electronics give us the ability to communicate with people across vast distances, it's not always meeting our needs as a human being. Bullying has also been a problem that has been impacted by this type of communication. In the past, what we think of as classic bullying is one person bullying in front of an audience, or maybe a couple people, they get some co-conspirators. But nowadays that can involve cyberbullying, where there can be videos and texts and things that are posted on social media. And that means that the kids involved in it, or the kids who are victimized by this, have a difficult time getting away from it because it just is out there. It's forever. Distance doesn't solve the problem. Time doesn't solve the problem. It's just there. This kind of thing can impact a child's social and academic life, both now because they're upset by it, and in the future because then they tend to feel like people can victimize me at any time and any place, and they tend to feel helpless and like there's nothing that we can do about it. One of the things that we can do for kids when they come to us and report bullying is to manage our reactions. And it's probably not the first thought that most of us have, but it's a very important one, because what kids want when they come and say somebody is bullying me is they want somebody to validate their feelings and saying, oh my gosh, that's terrible. They want to be comforted. They want somebody to say, I'm going to help you with this. And a lot of times, because they're our kids and we care about them, whether they're physiologically ours or they're just, kids that we have in our life that we care about, we get angry. We get angry because somebody's hurting our kid, which is a normal reaction, but it's not helping them in that moment. So if we can manage our reaction in that moment and validate their feelings and try to make a plan and help them work through this, it's probably going to help them more. And then we can take our reactions later with that anger and vent that in another place rather than in front of them. It just is what they're needing, is to know that everything is going to be okay eventually and that we'll work through this. So listen, manage our reactions, involve, if it's happening at school, we can work with the school. We can make plans on how to mitigate it and check back often to see if things are improving with this situation. A lot of time bystander intervention can be helpful with bullying, and that's when other people try to interrupt what is happening. And it's something that we can talk to our kids about, but we also need to talk about options and safety risks, because it's not always appropriate to do the same thing in every situation. Sometimes it's safe and okay to say something directly and to just say, hey, it's not okay what you're saying to them. Sometimes that may be dangerous. Maybe a distraction is in order. So if they see bullying going on, maybe they can say, hey, has anybody seen my backpack? Or, hey, is it time for lunch yet? What time is the game going to come on? Something like that, to just kind of distract for a minute. Sometimes it's appropriate to get help rather than to intervene in any way. Maybe that's not safe. Maybe it's more appropriate to go and get somebody else and say, hey, some bullying is going on. And at the very least, document and report it later when it's safe. But teaching kids how to intervene when other people are getting bullied can be very, very helpful, even if it's just that last option about documenting and maybe even reporting anonymously. But these can all be helpful things, and discussing with kids when it's appropriate to say something in person and when it might not be as safe can really be helpful to them. One of the things we don't like to think about with kids is relationship violence. And when we talk about domestic violence, we tend to think that this is, or think about it as something that happens to adults. But approximately 1 in 3 teens in the US is a victim of teen dating violence. They did a survey of Midwestern schools, and they found that 13% of 6th and 9th graders actually experience stalking this is a very young age for this to be happening. And every year, 1.5 million high school students are physically abused by their partners. We need to look at this as not being just a part of growing up. We need to have discussions with our kids, and this is where these healthy boundaries can kind of come into play. Hopefully, it will help them avoid some of this, but if they do get into it, we need to leave the door open. And again, managing our reactions, not getting, we're going to be mad at the other person, but comforting the person, leaving that door open. Hey, I care about you. Let's see what we can do to stop this from happening. And realize again that it happens to kids. It's not just adults. There's some very real things that come into play when there is relationship violence. Oftentimes, the person who is perpetrating that will isolate the person who is being victimized away from other support systems, away from family, away from friends. So making sure that we maintain those relationships and asking when we see that they're not being maintained, that something is maybe not, the way that it normally is, and checking in and say, hey, what's going on? I haven't seen much of you. And really letting them know that we're there for them, and leaving that door open can really make it easier for them to let us know what is happening in these situations. With any of the scenarios that we've talked about today, whether it's bullying, whether it's um, violent relationships, whether it's just run-of-the-mill having difficulties with friends or peers, we need to look for signs of trouble to let us know that we need to do some investigating and see, how to plan and how to address the issue. The first thing that I tell people is just look for anything that is different from the norm. There's all kinds of lists out there of behaviors that kids may engage in, but they're not all the same. If the kid that we're looking at is normally happy and outgoing, and then all of a sudden they're withdrawn, that's something to look at. If they normally eat a lot and now they're not eating at all, that's something to look at. Anything that is out of the norm for that kid is a sign that something is going on and it needs some investigation. Isolation from friends and family and other support systems is a big red flag. Bodily injuries, if we see a bruise on or a cut or something like that, ask questions, look for concealing clothing. Or is it, a day like today, whether it's 90 degrees and they're wearing a sweatshirt that covers all of their arms, that may be a sign. But the biggest one, again, is anything that is different from the norm will warrant some attention. And we need to be patient with kids and realize that because of the hormones that's going on, because of all the intensity that's happening, because all of these situations are new and it's just a difficult time of life, we need to learn that they're going to make mistakes, and mistakes are okay. We could, and I chose this graphic for a reason, if it weren't hot today, we could take a blanket outside, we could have a picnic, we could kick it around, we could have a good time. We might learn a few things about one another through conversation. But I want you to think back to that first intimate relationship that you had and the first difficulty that you encountered within that relationship, and ask yourself, how much did you learn from that? When we have relationship difficulties, we learn what we're okay with, what we're not, what we can do to help the situation, what we want in our lives, what we don't want in our lives. As human beings, we learn through mistakes. And we try to tell kids, don't do this because if you do this, this is going to happen. But a lot of times they just have to make the mistakes on their own, and that's how they learn. And when they do make those mistakes, what they need is support and, not anger at that point in time. So we need to learn to be patient. It is also important that kids know that it is okay for them to ask for help. This is difficult for a lot of people. It was a difficult lesson for me to learn. I like to be pretty independent, but there are times in our lives to where we all need help. And normalizing this, letting kids know to ask for help is very important. Our community mental health centers are great resources. The website to where you registered for this webinar actually has a list of community mental health centers. They will have services and a lot of things to help kids. They also have partnerships with other agencies in the communities where if there's not something that they that they can do, that they can direct to those other services. So this is always a good resource. The social workers that work in the schools and the counselors are another resources that we can utilize. But what we need to remember is when kids have these difficulties and they talk, what they're probably really going to look for is not the letters behind somebody's name or the expertise. Kids are going to talk to a trusted adult. Sometimes that works out well and that person knows what to do, but sometimes that person may not know what to do. So teaching kids, if they don't get help with something that they need the first time, to keep asking. And this is whether it's a math problem or whether it's difficulty in a relationship. Sometimes we just have to find that right person that is able to help us in order to get the answer. But they're probably going to go to someone that they trust. And that may not be the person that has the expertise to handle that. So it's important to let them know to keep asking. The most important thing that we have as human beings is to be able to look into a mirror and to like and respect that person that we see. And we need to have conversations with kids about when these things happen, how are you feeling about yourself? How can we get to a place to where you're not feeling bad? And do we need to involve outside people in order to help with this process? And letting them know, because when they're kids, a lot of other people have a lot of opinions about what they should or shouldn't be doing. Their peers who are struggling the same way that they are. And sometimes even adults will give them messages that can be harmful to them. So we need to let them know that the person who gets to define them is themselves, because no one gets to define anyone other than the person involved. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I know I've been talking for quite a while, and what I would like to do at this point is to take some questions. If any of you have questions that you'd like to ask, I would be happy to get into some answers.
Susan, thank you so much. What an incredible presentation. I felt like I learned things to use in my own adult relationships as well. So to think that some of these things are things we need to be talking about with kids, I think was eye-opening to me, especially when it came to relationship violence. So yes, if anyone has any questions, please put it in the chat, put it in the Q&A box, and we've got about 12 minutes for questions. So please drop anything that you want some more clarification or information on, and we will get to it. I will also put the link to the certificate of attendance along with the password in the chat. So if you need that, please, I'm going to go ahead and drop that in there right now. And then up at the top of the chat, there's also the link to next week's summer workshop about how we can support the mental health of college students. So great connection to today's session. Lots of thank yous rolling in, Susan. People really took a lot away from this, and I know I did as well.
I enjoy being here. Working with kids has been my passion for a lot of years, and it's amazing that we think kids aren't capable of employing a lot of these concepts, but they really are. It's just a matter of walking through these processes with them and getting them started.
Absolutely.
I'm seeing in the chat that some people are working with children who are 4 and 5 years old that are able to employ some of these concepts. So thank you for sharing that.
And then Susan, there was a question about cell phone bans in school. and also decreasing bullying.
Okay. In cell phone bans in school, are we meaning, I'm not seeing what are your opinions about cell phone bans in school? I don't know that I would support banning a cell phone in school, but I do support putting healthy boundaries around their usage. I taught at the college level for years, and one of the things that I addressed was, how cell phones impacted learning. So I think those teachers are well within their purview to say, when we're in class, put those cell phones face down on the desk, and our focus here should be on learning things. But if there's bullying going on in between classes or whatever, and the kid needs to use that cell phone for help, or they need to communicate picking a ride up from school. So I don't think a ban is maybe necessarily the best option, and this is just my opinion, but I do think putting some pretty strict boundaries about how and when those cell phones are used in school is very helpful.
And then there was another question, how can kids know that they can trust certain people, including their peers?
And this is a concept that I would say to an adult as well. What you want to look at with when you can trust other people is you want to always look at their behavior and not what is coming out of their mouth, because people can make things sound, make excuses for things, make things sound, great, and make you question yourself through things like, gaslighting, oh, you're being too sensitive, these kind of things. Always look at that person's behavior. What does that person's behavior say to you? Does it say that they are someone who is trying to help you, or do they say that it's someone that is trying to manipulate you? So when you're trying to figure out if you can trust someone, I would always look to the behavior rather than the things that the person is saying. Let's see, we got a question about stalking. Stalking is when you find it intrusive, when people are figuring out where you are, what you're doing, intruding into your life in ways that you don't want, and that boundary may look different from person to person. And again, it comes back to, I'm not okay with this. This doesn't feel good. This feels creepy, knowing where I am all the time and just showing up and just setting those boundaries and saying, I'm not okay with this. It becomes stalking to the point is when you've tried to set those boundaries and they don't honor them and they keep doing it. Sometimes kids just don't have good social boundaries because this is something that they're learning, especially at younger ages. They may think it's okay to just show up at somebody's house or to show up when they're with their other friends. And maybe all they really need at that point is someone to say, I need you to stop that. If it goes past that point where they've communicated, I need you to stop that, and somebody is still doing it, then I would say that we're venturing into the realm of stalking at that point. So let's see. I've missed one. There was another.
Yeah, there's one that says COVID seemed to really alter some of the normal ways and times kids learned how to interact with one another. And now the junior high kids do not even know how to have a normal conversation or interact outside of text, talk, or abbreviations.
Mm-hmm. And that's something that research tends to be finding as well, and it's contributing to kids being lonely. So it's really important to provide opportunities for kids to have in-person activities. So anything that we can interest them in or get them involved into where this is happening, even if it's something as simple as allowing them to have a friend over to the house rather than, communicating through text all the time. It's very helpful. COVID impacted our society in a variety of ways. One of the positive impacts it's had is people are much more willing to have discussions about mental health. And so that's probably a good thing. But then the point that you're speaking to is also absolutely valid, that a lot of times people neglect their relationships. I have a friend that tells me, you're the only person that calls me, everybody else just texts. But that relationship is so much richer than just putting some words on a screen. We really do need those human interactions in order to be healthy.
Absolutely. Any other questions? We've got about 5 more minutes. Great questions so far.
Yeah, I'm seeing somebody having a suggestion about cell phones in the class, that it's helpful to have kids put their phone in a box and pick them up when they leave the room. If the teacher wants to put that in place, I think that would be acceptable. Um, so that's just another form of the teacher setting a boundary over what's okay in their class and what isn't. Uh, there's a question about when relationships have become a little bit distant and people haven't been having conversations with their kids on the regular, but wanting to, how to get those started. Um, a great thing to do is to find an activity to do, even if it's just let's go and eat, let's go out and eat, and while we're eating, we won't put the cell phone on the table, or let's go get some ice cream, or even I've seen families, and I know it sounds cheesy, engage into we're going to have family night, once a month where everyone has to be there and we're going to play board games or something like that. That does not seem very modern. Anything that gets people together gives them an opportunity to speak. So I guess the answer to your question is I would try to engage them in an activity to where the conversation will come out more naturally than just saying, hey, sit down and we're going to talk. I mean, you're certainly welcome to do that too, but it might be a bit more natural if there's an activity involved.
Yeah, and then Tess, thank you for putting the reminder about the summer workshop that's happening next Thursday. So if you didn't get a chance to register earlier, that link is in the chat again for you right now. Still a few more minutes for questions for anyone else who is just dying to ask Susan a question.
Someone put an idea in the chat that I like, said they made dates with their kids where they were the one-on-one with them and we could talk. I mean, that's great. And that's helpful too. I've seen families to where one sibling is maybe jealous of another sibling, and it had been very helpful in those families to where they had one night with one kid and then one night with the other where they were getting alone one-on-one time with the parent, and that helped to alleviate some of that jealousy. You just have to make sure that you're engaging with each one.
More thank yous rolling in. Any other questions? We've got time for probably one or two more questions if anyone has something they want to ask.
Don't ask me if I can get us better weather. That's a little out of my purview. I wish I could.
And then there was a comment, role-playing conversations with clients has helped so much with those kids who lack social skills, the actual words to say in a human conversation versus text.
Absolutely. And that's something in the mental health fields that we've been doing for years is role play. But I also want to give parents permission that that's something you can also do with your kids. It may be a little hard to get them to buy into it at first, but you can absolutely do those kind of things in the home, and maybe modeling that where two adults do it with each other first and then, try to include the child in that process. So role play is fantastic because it's a safe way to try out new skills rather than putting them into practice in a critical situation.
Still time for one more question if anyone has anything. Thank you all so much for being here. And Susan, from all of us, thank you so much. So much great information that you packed in here today and lots of actionable insights that we can all take away.
Yeah, it was enjoyable for me. I like doing this because I feel like if it empowers somebody else to make a positive interaction with the child, then it's all worth it.
So then for anyone who's having issues with the certificate, if you just print it out and write on it, that should suffice.
There's a question at the bottom about how do you get kids to share who their online conversations are without you thinking they are nosy. I think it's okay if kids think you're nosy, to be honest with you. It communicates to them that you care, and it's usually the people who say no to them, they realize later, are the ones that really care about what's going on. I think the easiest way to do this is to set some boundaries from the very beginning when they first start having online conversations about, I need to be able to see what you're doing because this may be a dangerous situation for you, and just getting that in place. It's natural for teenagers to want to be more private than little kids. So at that point in time, it becomes more challenging, but just starting that at the beginning is probably one of the best roads to that.
And then the password for the certificate is going to be Susan's last name, Lechliter, 7.24.
You're going to make them spell my last name? Well, that is challenging.
I put it in the chat. Let me try to put it in there one more time. I'm having technical difficulties on my computer.
Okay.
There we go. Look. All right, I just put that that Lechliter 7.24. That is going to be your passcode for the certificate of attendance. You can just print that off, put in your own name, and that will get you what you need. All right, well, we are right at 1 o'clock. We want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all again so much for being here. Susan, thank you again for such a wonderful presentation. And we will hope to see you all maybe next week at the summer workshop. Otherwise, we will see you back here next month for our webinar.